a story to begin, and this is one that circulates the web, and we don't know whether it has any veracity. I haven't even checked it out, but it's a good story anyway. Some of you will remember this. A man is sitting on the steps of a building with a hat by his feet, and he's blind, and he says, "I'm blind, please help me," with his, kind of a bowl and so on. And a creative publicist is passing by, and he notices there's only a few coins in the bowl. And so he, without asking permission, he just takes the sign, he rewrites it, puts it down, and leaves. End of the day, he comes back from work, sees the blind man sitting there, and the bowl is overflowing with coins and with cash and so on. Now, the blind man heard his footsteps and recognized him. So he said, "Are you you're the one that did something to my sign?" And the publicist responded, "I changed it a little, but I didn't write anything that wasn't true." Here's what he said. The sign read, "Today is spring, and I cannot see it." Now, as you can tell from the story, this has nothing to do with physical blindness. This has to do, and when we feel a pang in our hearts that can resonate, this has to do with moving through life, but not really being available, not being able to really see or feel or be touched by what's happening. This is when our senses are closed off, and in some way, we are caught up in reactivity. And if we look at that, it's a deep inquiry of, really what's between me and being open to the life that's here. And what we find is either our mood is depressed, or we're caught up in some sort of a judgment or reactivity towards others or towards ourselves, or we're just restless or distracted. But if we look more carefully underneath any of those moods or states, what we find is fear. That's the core emotion. And it's ironic because our fear is about losing life. And by being caught up in fear, we lose life. That's the sadness. There's all different kinds. There's, traumatic fear, there's deep gripping fear, there's anxiety that targets different things in different moments or that's free-floating. But around the corner, there's this sense that something's going to fail. It's like a sense like in any moment, something big is going to go wrong. And the very word worry, the origins of the word worry mean to strangle. So when we're feeling fear, in some way our life force is getting strangled. There's a contraction that takes us away from wholeness and presence. So one of the terms I find really useful when we consider what happens to us when we're afraid, the way our mind contracts into busy thoughts and our body gets tense and our heart gets tight. I like the language of body of fear, or sometimes called the fear body, because the body includes all the different parts of us. And when we're in that trance, in that fear trance, our body of fear is contracted, and it's really, our world is seen through that lens. The world is smaller. So what I'd like to do tonight is explore how we typically react when we get triggered, how we kind of intensify the body of fear, the fear body, with our reactivity, and how, if we can learn to pause, if we can slow down even a little, we can shift from fight-flight to attend and befriend. And I really see this shift of fight-flight, this kind of automatic reactivity, to attend and befriend as a sign of the evolution of consciousness. That we even have this capacity to recognize, oh, I'm in fight-flight. Oh, I'm identified with the fear body. Okay, pause, deepen attention. Attend and befriend. So we'll look at that, and I want to say right off that befriend does not mean that we always are immediately embracing with great love the fear that's there. Because the very biochemistry of fear and the biochemistry of love aren't the same. But there's a movement towards that loving presence when we attend and then regard with gentleness what's here. We kind of inch towards it. Okay. So first, the function of fear, as we know, is survival. That every one of these body minds here, we all have this nervous system that is rigged to anticipate what can harm us. And if fear wasn't there, you'd be brain dead. You know, it's meant to be there. So it's a basic survival function. We're meant to scan for threats and respond to them. Now, most of our fears, because of the twists and turns of evolution, are not directly linked to physical survival anymore. Most of them are around the stories and emotions that have to do with our well-being in social context. A lot of our fears around personal failure. You know, what's going to go wrong, how I'm not going to be prepared, how I'm going to fall short, how I'm going to be rejected, how I'm going to drop the ball on something and all hell is going to break loose. You know, it's just something's going to go wrong, and it usually has to do with me. That's a lot of our fears. Around the corner, I'm going to fall short. I'm already falling short, but it'll have big consequences, you know, that thing. But even underneath that, when we examine fear, the deep core level is this sense of the fragility of life. That every one of us intuits this uncertainty. And it's true, it is uncertain, and it's fragile. So fear is an anticipation of what's going to go wrong because of that fragility. And if we can begin to distinguish between our habitual fear reaction, the one that's kind of programmed into us that gets overdone, and when there's actually a threat that we need to respond to, we end up living most of our moments in the awareness of the fear body, but not stuck inside it. But there's a discrimination that goes on. Is this really something to respond to that's a danger, or is this just my habit? Most of it's habit, really. You know, how Mark Twain put it, he said, the worst things in my life never actually happened, you know. That. So it's anticipation of what's going to go wrong. And I watch myself so often with it, because part of my sadhana, which is a spiritual practice, is I go into the woods most days and go walking, and I can start sensing what my mind is like. You know, if I'm walking, but I'm not really on the river by the trees. I'm thinking of the emails I didn't respond to, or I have to fill this prescription for medication before I go travel, and did I make the right plane reservations? And, you know, did I have time? Am I going to have time to finish the fear talk? You know, that kind of thing. Anyway, and then the practice is, okay, wait a minute. It's not helping me to prevent something from going wrong by ruminating, because usually it's not. So come back, okay. What am I seeing? What are the forms, the colors, the blossoms, the smells? You know, what's the feeling of the earth as I'm walking? Come back, come back. So that's one discrimination. And I was thinking as I was writing this of a time last year that I was walking, and the wind started blowing more and more intensely, and twigs were crackling and so on. And then all of a sudden, there was a huge crash, and I saw a tree come down. You know, but right when the crash happened, I instinctively covered my head. And I want to just, and then I hightailed it out of there. I got home. I was not going, okay, the breeze on the cheek, feeling the feet, you know, it's like, that was no longer the point. You know, it was like, get out of there. So we don't suffer because we anticipate threats and respond appropriately. We suffer because our sympathetic nervous system is locked into a fight-flight reaction, and we're just continuously interpreting the world through that lens. We're living in a fearful, anxious mentality. So this is the fear body, and it becomes our identity. And you can sense for yourself, how much of the time is there some sense of who I am as being hitched with the fear of what's going to go wrong, the insecurity socially, the reactivity to situations. How much of our self-sense is hitched to that? So then the inquiry becomes, well, what makes it so strong for so many of us? It gets definitely amplified by the culture we're in. I mean, you can't listen to the news and read the newspapers without being triggered. I mean, it's just the way, it's the slant of our culture. We've got a very fear-based culture. And then you can sense also it has to do with genetics, and our upbringing is one of the biggest factors. To the degree we had an insecure upbringing, not good attachments with, the healthy attachments with our parents. There's a sense of something's wrong with me and things are going to keep going wrong. It gets locked into our nervous system. So part of the inquiry is to recognize how we habitually react to fear. You know, what is your fear management strategy? It's really useful to know it, because if you know it, then you can begin to pause and move from your version of fight-flight to attend and befriend. But the first step is recognizing. And if I have any goal in this talk, one of the big ones is that after it, you'll be at least a degree more interested when fear comes up. Because if you're interested, if you don't automatically tumble into the reaction, in that interest, there's a bit of a pause and more freedom to deepen attention versus continue the fight-flight. There's more choice. Interest helps. Okay, so what are our strategies? And you know the major ones. One of them that isn't talked about as much is freeze, the freeze strategy. It's when we're overwhelmed and powerless and there's no way to effectively respond. Animals of all sorts and us humans, we freeze on some level. But the ones that we're most used to are the flight and the fight. So flight, what do we know about flight? Like, how do we flee or pull back from the feelings of fear and from the triggers of fear? How do we do that in our lives? Okay, so I'll read you. This is Freud. If I brought it. Yeah, here we go. Freud writes, life, as we find it, is too hard for us. In order to bear it, we cannot dispense with palliative measures. There are perhaps 3 such measures. Powerful deflections, which cause us to make light of our misery in the way we ignore it. Substitute satisfactions, which diminish it, and intoxicating substances, which make us insensible to it. That's pretty well. I'll say it again. 3 such measures. Powerful deflections, which cause us to make light of our misery. Substitute satisfactions, which diminish it, and intoxicating substances, which make us insensible to it. So what's your management strategy? Is it the kind of deflect and ignore, so that there's fear going on, but I'm not going to deal with that, you know? It's kind of muscling it through, stiff upper lip kind of thing. You know, for most of us, in some way, what we're doing is a control strategy. And we are trying to control things so we reduce the unpleasantness. We're in some way trying to get away from what feels wrong. One of my favorite stories, Edith Wharton, she says, one day, when the Sultan was in his palace at Damascus, a beautiful youth who was his favorite rushed into his presence, crying out in great agitation that he must fly at once to Baghdad and imploring leave to borrow His Majesty's swiftest horse. The Sultan asked why he was in such a haste to go to Baghdad. Because, the youth answered, as I passed through the garden of